Can Biden win according to the 13 keys? Welcome, my name is Kotel. Let's talk some politics. As we approach the general election, I have seen a good amount of discourse emerge regarding Dr. Allan Lichtman's 13 keys for predicting who will win the White House. Specifically, I watched with interest a debate he had with the Young Turks host Cenk Uyghur. Links to those discussions are in the description. Dr. Lippman stated that he would not make his final evaluation on where President Biden falls within the 13 keys until after the Democratic Convention occurs in August. However, I thought it might be instructive and fun to attempt to apply those keys to the presidential race as it stands today. In determining these keys to the election, I will reference Dr. Lippman's 2020 book, Predicting the Next President, The Keys to the White House. In making my determinations, I will lean into his acknowledgement that some of the keys require subjective judgments and are not purely quantifiable. On this point, he writes, one explanation for the widening gulf between political science and the practice of politics is the political scientists' insistence on considering only what can be quantified. The keys attempt to achieve the most valid possible model of presidential elections, even if it leaves open the possibility that different analysts may reach different judgments on individual keys, or in the case of close calls, make different predictions about an upcoming election. In this video, I will attempt to use his established criteria for judging each of the 13 keys, while also endeavoring to make clear any potential room for subjectivity in my analysis and aligning it as best as I can with standards applied by Dr. Lichtman. Per his thesis, an incumbent will lose if he has 6 or more keys turned against them. I will proceed through each of the 13 keys in turn and evaluate them with 3, cheating a bit here, possible categorizations. For my purposes, 2 of the 3 evaluations will be true or positive and false or negative, consistent with Dr. Lichtman's methodology. The third category will be keys for which I can identify at least 2 plausible contradictory interpretations, or in which keys may be dependent on ongoing events which reasonably can go in either positive or negative directions. I will indicate a negative rating as working against President Biden, while a positive rating as in his favor. A too early will be noted for contingent keys. With that being said, let's get started. Key 1. Incumbent Party Mandate. After the midterm elections, the incumbent party holds more seats in the U.S. House of Representatives than it did after the previous midterm elections. Although the GOP did not perform as well as was expected, they did gain control of the House in the 2022 midterm elections. Contrasting with in 2018, the Democrats held a majority with 235 seats. Therefore, the GOP has more seats now than they did in the previous midterm election. This key turns against President Biden. Current score, 1 negative. Key 2, nomination contest. There's no serious contest for the incumbent party nomination. The campaigns of RFK Jr. and Dean Phillips did not pose a serious challenge to President Biden, nor did the uncommitted delegate protest vote materialize as a major obstacle. At this point, I would award this key in favor of the president. However, it may be that opposition continues to materialize and that even if Biden retains the nomination, if a substantial portion of the Democratic Party calls for him to drop out, especially at the convention, then this may turn the key against him. However, at the time of this writing, there have not yet been sufficient calls to warrant such a switch. Current score, 1 negative, 1 positive. Key 3, incumbency. The incumbent party candidate is the sitting president. The president is the incumbent. Enough said. Score, 1 negative, 2 positive. Key 4, third party. There is no significant third party or independent campaign. This one is a bit trickier. Per Dr. Lichtman, for upcoming elections, any candidate who appears likely to win 5% or more of the popular vote is a major third party contender. If, however, a third-party candidacy clearly resulted from a split within the challenging party, it would not topple Key 4. In addition, we have The additional factors of Cornel West and Jill Stein, both between 0 and 2% in the RCP aggregate, both of which likely drawing almost exclusively from President Biden. Dr. Lichtman notes, Key 4 is not turned against the party in power when several of the perennial third parties together have garnered more than 5% of the vote. At this point in time, in the polling between the three regularly polled third-party candidates, it appears that a sufficient third-party challenge has been met, although it is possible that a combination of ballot access and future polling dips may cause a reevaluation of this key. But for now, the key turns against the president. Current score, 2 negative, 2 positive. Key 5, short-term economy. The economy is not in recession during the election campaign. This one is another that is trickier than initially meets the eye for me. The economy is certainly not in a recession right now, and there are numerous positive indicators from GDP growth to unemployment figures to support this conclusion. By the technical recession definition, it appears this key would turn for Biden. However, Dr. Lichtman opens the door for some alternative interpretations. He writes, the short-term economy key does not necessarily depend on whether an economic downturn meets a narrow technical definition of a recession. Indeed, economists cannot agree on any simple objective way to gauge the beginning or end points of recession. The key depends primarily on whether there is a widespread perception of an economy mired in recession during the election campaign. There is certainly widespread apprehension for the short-term economic prospects in the United States. On the other hand, recession does not appear to be a common interpretation for the concern. Rather, it appears more centered on cost of living and affordability, tied specifically to inflation. As Dr. Lichtman notes, the actual conditions do not matter as much as perceptions of the general public. Using the 1980 and 1992 elections as examples of perceptions of poor economic status affecting the election rather than actual conditions at the time. If I maintain a strict adherence to the concept of recession, this key would turn in favor of President Biden. However, if perception of economic performance is expanded wider to include concerns such as cost of living, it may turn against him. Therefore, I will take the coward's way out and leave this as too early to tell to see if the wider definition applies. Current score, 2 negative, 2 positive, 1 too early to tell. Key 6, long-term economy. Real annual per capita economic growth during the term equals or exceeds mean growth during the previous 2 terms. This is another category that should in theory be relatively straightforward, but for which I struggle with to categorize. Looking at the 2022 to 2023 real GDP per capita data, Biden should have this key in his favor, if only slightly. However, the biggest issue with a straightforward conclusion is the COVID-19 economic impacts that bookend the Trump and Biden administrations. The massive economic shocks, and more importantly, how both it and the recovery are interpreted by the population, is difficult for me to judge, as is potential impact on this key. Perhaps worrying for the Biden camp, Lichtman argues Key 6 captures voters' concerns that are not always reflected in the election year economy key. Inflation, for example, was a subject of concern in the elections of 1948, 1952, and 1976. But in none of those years did it outpace nominal growth and topple the short-term economy key. In each case, though, its effects are expressed in a negative long-term economy key. Given Dr. Lichtman's specific reference to inflation having an impact to spike growth levels, I am going to once more take the coward's way out and say that it is too early to tell with this key, especially given my lack of an economic background, the nebulous nature or perception of economic prospects generally, and the potential interpretation of responsibility for the COVID downturn specifically. Current score, 2 negative, 2 positive, 2 too early to tell. Key 7, policy change. The incumbent administration effects major changes in national policy. Despite some minor tweaking, the Biden administration's overall policies have been relatively consistent. Furthermore, President Biden has framed his goals for the second term as a continuation and completion of his first term. As such, this key falls in President Biden's favor. Current score, 2 negative, 3 positive, 2 too early. Key 8. Social unrest. There is no sustained social unrest during the term. Despite enduring demonstrations related to the Israel-Gaza conflict, in my opinion, there are not sufficient levels of social unrest for this key to turn against President Biden. However, the potential for agitation at the Democratic Convention in Chicago may require a revisitation of this key, especially if this unrest bookends back onto college campuses and elsewhere as the school year begins and the election draws nearer. If the conflict in the Middle East flares up substantially, such as an expansion of the conflict into Lebanon or the West Bank, this may also drive an intensification of protest movements and therefore unrest. However, such massive protests have yet to materialize, and as such, I rate this key in President Biden's favor. Current score, 2 negative, 4 positive, 2 too early to call. Key 9, scandal. The incumbent administration is untainted by major scandal. At first blush, President Biden should have this key locked down. Potential scandals related to the her classified documents probe or the Mayorkas impeachment have floundered, and it seems Hunter Biden's legal troubles are not rubbing off substantially on his father. However, I would argue that a scandal is emerging that could potentially move this key against President Biden. That scandal concerns the supposed cover-up of his declining mental faculties and him stubbornly staying on the ticket allegedly against the desires of large portions of the Democratic Party. As Dr. Lichtman notes, to produce this effect, however, and to reach the historical threshold for major scandal, the wrongdoing has to bring discredit upon the president himself, calling into question his personal integrity, or at least his faithfulness in upholding the law. There appears to be a growing narrative that the president and his team have been actively covering up his declining mental acuity and by extension have refused to see reason and exit the race. Although so far the discourse surrounding this issue appears deferential to the president, at least in the Democratic circles, this may merely be a ploy to coax him to exit the race through flattery. If he continues to buck the interest of a supposed growing chorus of his party and supporters, and they in turn deepen their calls for his exit, those Democratic critics may increasingly and publicly question the president's motives. With these factors in mind, I am classifying this key as too early to tell. Current score, 2 negative, 4 positive, 3 too early to tell. Key 10, foreign or military failure. The incumbent administration suffers no major failure in foreign or military affairs. I would argue there are a number of candidates for foreign and military failures for the Biden administration. Such candidates could include the Afghanistan exit, failure to deter the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the failure to achieve a ceasefire in the Israeli-Gaza war. There may be alternative interpretations for any of the above-mentioned incidents, or inclusion of others that I didn't mention here. But I am confident that a sufficient cross-section of the electorate will view one or more of these, or others, as foreign and/or policy failures significant enough to impact the election and turn the key against President Biden. Current score, 3 negative, 4 positive, 3 too early to tell. Key 11, foreign or military success. The incumbent administration achieves a major success in foreign or military affairs. Although the Biden administration can point to progress on a number of foreign policy fronts, such as the expansion of NATO, creation of AUKUS, and support to Ukraine, none of these policies, in my view, reach the level of a clear-cut success. It is possible that President Biden could achieve such a success between now and the election, such as a major successful counteroffensive by Ukraine or an enduring ceasefire in Gaza. But neither seems likely at the time of this writing. Till such a time as such a success appears likely, this key turns against the president. Current score, 4 negative, 4 positive, 3 too early to tell. Key 12, incumbent charisma. The incumbent party candidate is charismatic or a national hero. Lichtman previously cataloged President Biden as uncharismatic in the 2020 election. Currently, I don't think he rises to the level of a national hero, and I concur that he remains uncharismatic. Thus, this key turns against the president. Current score, 5 negative, 4 positive, 3 too early to tell. Key 13, challenger charisma. The challenging party candidate is not charismatic or a national hero. President Trump does not fit to the category of national hero, such as Eisenhower or Grant in Lichtman's categorization. Over charisma for Trump is a subjective evaluation. Lichtman twice weighed President Trump as uncharismatic in the previous election cycles. However, in my estimation, Trump does have a great deal of pull with his base of support, and much of this comes down to his personal demeanor, showmanship. It is unclear that this appeal extends much beyond his base of support, though. However, the assassination attempt and President Trump's immediate reaction may cause a fundamental shift in perceptions towards him. It is unclear whether this will come to pass, but I think it is plausible at this point. Therefore, I will rate this as too early to tell. The final score for President Biden is 5 negative keys, 4 positive keys, and 4 which are too early to tell. Using Dr. Lichtman's methodology and based on my above analysis, at this point in time, President Biden has so far avoided losing 6 keys, which would doom his White House bid. However, there are still at least 3 keys which could spoil his run. 3 keys which may turn the election are scandal, related to perceived deceptions, Biden's infirmity, and the 2 economic keys, specifically if the first includes wider concerns related to the cost of living and purchasing power, or is merely related to recession, as well as the general mood towards the economy and inflation, which may shift in either direction in the coming months. Public reaction and changes in perception of Trump after the assassination attempt may also shift a key, specifically charisma key. However, there are other categories such as foreign policy successes or failures, social unrest, third-party viability, and contested status, all of which can be moved in either direction and either strengthen or weaken President Biden's hand. Perhaps the biggest issue, though, is whether or not Biden can weather this storm calling for him to drop out, and perhaps even resign now from the presidency, as this can potentially impact multiple keys in a negative fashion. We'll see in a few weeks how Dr. Lichtman evaluates President Biden and President Trump on the above keys. What do you guys think? Are the 13 keys a useful tool? Do you agree with my analysis? What did I get right and what did I get wrong? How would you rate President Biden and President Trump in each key and why? Let me know in the comments below. Thank you for listening. This is Kotal, signing off.